The sky was the color of old bruises, heavy with clouds and thick with silence. Rain slithered down the wooden awnings of the rough trade town like it had something to hide. Mud-soaked boots and hems and the scent of wet earth mingled with horse sweat and wood smoke. Men stood shoulder to shoulder beneath makeshift awnings and dripping hats, their eyes fixed on the raised platform at the center of the square. No one laughed, no one smiled. They just waited, jaws clenched and coin purses gripped. A bell rang once. A woman stepped forward. She wore a coarse sack over her head, tied at the base of her throat with twine. Her dress, once ivory, was now the color of storm water. Her wrists were bare, her hands still. She didn't stumble, didn't cry. The only thing visible beneath the sack was the long, jagged scar that ran from her cheekbone to the hinge of her jaw. It pulsed faintly when she breathed. The auctioneer didn't waste time. "Lot 7, he barked. "Strong, no children, quiet as stone, good bones." The crowd murmured. A few men shifted uncomfortably. Someone spat. Near the back of the crowd, a man leaned against a hitching post, water streaming from the brim of his hat. He was broad through the shoulders, with a coat patched in too many places and boots that had seen better years. A beard crawled along his jaw like a second skin, but it was his eyes that set him apart. Gray, worn, kind in a way that suggested he'd paid for it. His name was Silas Boone, and he had not come to town for a woman. But he couldn't look away. The sack turned slightly, sensing attention. The scar caught the light, a pale ridge of old pain. Still, no movement from her, no sound. She stood as if already buried, head bowed and breath slow. The bidding was low. A drunk tried 2 coins and was laughed off. A rancher near the front shook his head. Too quiet, probably touched in the head. Silas stepped forward without raising his voice. 10. The crowd stilled. The auctioneer blinked. 10? Silas nodded once. There were no counteroffers, no challenges. It wasn't worth the risk. "Sold," the auctioneer muttered. "To the lumberman." Silas approached. The woman didn't flinch as he reached out and untied the sack. It slid off her head and crumpled at her feet like a dead thing. Her hair was dark, matted by rain, and her skin was the pale of someone who hadn't seen the sun in weeks. Her eyes met his, green, bloodshot, and empty, but somewhere deep, something still flickered. He didn't speak, just handed her a folded oilskin cloak. She didn't thank him. They walked through the mud together, side by side. Silence stretched between them, not heavy, not yet. The townsfolk whispered, but no one stopped them. He helped her onto the mule-drawn cart, and she settled without complaint, eyes forward, hands folded in her lap like a church widow. The road out of town curved through soaked fields and broken fences, rising slowly into the edge of the forest. He didn't offer questions, and she offered nothing. Her voice remained buried, her past sealed behind the silence in her throat. After an hour, the mule cart shuddered to a halt. One wheel had sunk deep into a rut of soft earth. Silas jumped down and cursed under his breath. He began working the axle, shoulders straining. Behind him, soft footsteps in mud. She moved to the back of the cart, grabbed hold of the frame without a word, and pushed with surprising strength. Together, they freed it. Their eyes met again. No thanks, no smiles, just the quiet acknowledgement of survival. By dusk, the trees thickened, and the trail turned mean. Crows scattered from low branches, and the wind sharpened. Silas watched her shiver and reached behind the seat for a woven blanket. He offered it. She took it slowly, peeping it around herself with precise, controlled movements. Her knuckles were raw. Old bruises dotted the underside of her wrists. At the crest of the trail the cabin appeared. 2 stories of rough-hewn timber tucked between pines like a secret. Smoke whispered from the chimney, and firelight flickered inside. A dog barked once, then went silent. He helped her down. She hesitated at the porch, looking at the doorway like it might bite. "You're safe here," he said for the first time. Her voice, when it came, was dry and jagged. "You don't even know me." "I don't need to." Inside, the cabin was plain but warm. A fire crackled, shelves lined with tools and books, a table with 2 chairs, one leg shorter than the others. She stood near the hearth, arms crossed, watching the flames like they might speak. He boiled water, pulled down dried meat and set it on a plate. She ate slowly, methodically. He noticed she didn't touch the bread. Too many crumbs, maybe. He poured her a cup of something hot and herbal. She sipped, then winced. "Burn your tongue?" She shook her head. "No, just not used to it." They didn't speak again that night. He gestured toward the loft. She climbed the ladder in silence. He stayed by the fire, feeding it wood 1 log at a time, listening for any sound above. There was none. Rain started again near midnight, soft and steady. He stared into the fire until sleep took him where it always did, to the sound of his wife's voice, the smell of smoke, the scream that never stopped in time. Morning came gray and cold. She was already up, tending the fire, hair tied back with twine. She'd swept the floor and folded the blanket. "You didn't have to," he said. She didn't look up. "It's better when I work." He nodded. "Name?" She stiffened. "Yours," he clarified. "Only if you want me to use it." There was a pause, then, "Annabelle." "Silas," he replied, though she hadn't asked. A week passed. The forest remained thick with mist, and the rivers swelled with meltwater. He showed her how to cut kindling, how to use the stove, how to fix a leaky roof. She never complained, never spoke more than a handful of words. But one night, she sat beside the fire, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, and whispered, "You're not like the others." He looked at her carefully. What others? She didn't answer. He didn't push. The next day, a storm rolled through, hard and sudden. Trees groaned. A branch crashed onto the roof, cracking a beam. They worked together in the rain, dragging tarp and timber, hammering down with bare hands and soaked sleeves. Mud slicked the floor, and water poured through the seams. At the end of it, soaked to the bone and aching, she laughed once. Just a breath, barely there, but real. He looked at her, startled. She caught herself. "I forgot what that sounded like." That night she sat by the window, watching lightning carve through the trees. Her scar caught the flash. Silas sat nearby, sharpening an axe, listening. She turned slightly. "Do you believe people can come back from who they were?" He didn't answer right away, just studied the blade. "Sometimes," he said. "What matters is who sees you after." Her gaze fell to the sackcloth, now folded neatly by the hearth. "That thing. It used to mean shame. It doesn't have to anymore." Silence again, deeper, gentler. She stood slowly, walked to the door, opened it. The rain had stopped. Stars blinked overhead like cautious witnesses. She stepped outside barefoot, feeling the wet earth beneath her toes. The forest creaked, but she didn't flinch this time. He watched her from the doorway, arms crossed. She turned. "Thank you." He nodded once. She added, "For not asking questions. Sometimes not knowing is the kindest thing." She smiled, barely, but enough. As she disappeared into the tree line, just a few steps to breathe, the forest welcomed her like it remembered. Something. She was no longer just a number, no longer a lot sold in the rain. And though danger still lingered beyond those trees, and memory still burned like coals in her chest, tonight she walked with her head a little higher. Inside, Silas returned to the fire, pulling the sackcloth into his lap. He studied the rough weave, then folded it carefully, tucking it into the chest beside his wife's old shawl. Above him, a creak from the loft. Not fear. Just someone moving freely for the first time. And he knew, whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced the mud, and the rain, and the broken roof. Together. Morning crept into the cabin with pale fingers, sliding across the wood floor and catching the dust in a golden haze. Annabelle stood barefoot at the threshold, steam rising from the mug in her hands, eyes following the light through the shifting branches. Her hair was looser now, no longer scraped back in fear. The scar on her cheek had faded from angry red to a softer pale pink. It no longer felt like a warning, more like a mark of having survived. Silas emerged from behind the cabin, hands blackened with pitch, shirt stuck to his back with sweat and sap. He set an axe down against the woodpile and nodded at her. No need for greetings anymore. They spoke in shared glances and small movements, him refilling her cup without asking, her patching his shirts at night with leftover thread and silence. The rhythm of the forest had worked its way into her bones. There was healing in repetition. Fetch water, stack wood, boil meat, cut herbs. She no longer flinched at every bird call or gust of wind, and the knife stayed sheathed beneath her bed, untouched now for days. Her hands, though still thin, had found strength again, gripping rope, holding a saw, twisting logs into place when Silas rebuilt the broken porch step. Sometimes at dusk, he would hum while he carved figures from pine. Bears, birds, a tiny wolf. She watched him once. He curled in a blanket by the fire and said, almost startled by her own voice, "You've got a gentler hand than I'd expect." He glanced up. "Used to carve whistles for my niece, calmed her when the world got loud." "Is she gone?" he said. along with the world she belonged to. That night Annabelle didn't sleep. Not for fear, but because the weight of memory came softer now, like a fog instead of a thunderclap. She lay staring at the slats in the loft ceiling, counting each one and thinking of a girl she used to be, the one who ran barefoot through tall grass, who sang on Sundays, who once believed the world might be kind. The next morning the forest sent them a visitor. He came not on horseback but on foot, gliding between the trees like a shadow born from bark and breeze. His clothing was worn leather, stitched with sinew. A hawk feather hung from his braid, and his eyes, dark, knowing, saw everything. He said nothing when he stepped into the clearing, simply stood at the edge like the forest had shaped him there. Silas spotted him first, raised a hand in silent greeting. "Tohi," he said. Annabelle stood back, uncertain. The man inclined his head toward her. "The trees know her now," he said. His voice was deep, careful, like each word was measured before it left his tongue. "She's earned that," Silas replied. Tohi looked at Annabelle with a kind of reverence that unsettled her, not worship, not pity, recognition. "I don't need a mystic," she muttered. Tohi smiled faintly. "Forest doesn't send what you need, just what you fear." That night he shared their fire, spoke little, watched everything. When Annabelle offered stew, he bowed slightly before accepting. She noticed he never took the first bite until both she and Silas had eaten, not out of suspicion but custom, respect. Days passed and Tohi lingered. He slept in the forest but always returned before dawn, stepping from the trees like a ghost who chose not to haunt. Annabelle began to trust him, in small ways. She noticed how he spoke to birds, how he knelt by animal tracks with a reverence she remembered from church pews, how he could disappear in a blink but always made noise when he approached the cabin, never startling her. One morning he handed her a bow. She stared at it. "I've never used one." He gestured to the target he'd carved into a birch. "Not about killing, about breathing." She tried, missed, tried again, missed again. He corrected her posture with a light touch at her shoulder, a shift of the wrist. When the arrow finally struck bark, she felt something shift inside her. Not pride, not power, belonging. Later, while skinning a rabbit Silas had trapped, she asked, "Why is he really here?" Silas shrugged. "Shows up every year around the season change, says nothing, leaves nothing, just watches the woods. He watches me." Silas looked up from sharpening his blade. "He's seen wounds like yours. Maybe he's making sure the scar's not still bleeding." Tohi, for his part, never pried. But one evening as the three of them sat around the fire, a branch snapped in the distance. Tohi stood instantly, muscles tight, eyes scanning the trees. "What is it?" Annabelle whispered. "Something watching," he said. Silas reached for his rifle. Tohi held up a hand. "Not animal, not spirit." Then he disappeared into the woods, soundless. An hour later he returned holding a torn piece of parchment, a wanted poster. Annabelle's face stared back at them in rough charcoal. The scar, unmistakable, a name printed beneath it in crooked letters. Her hands trembled as she took it. Her teeth sloshed onto the floor, forgotten. Silas stood. "Is this real?" She didn't answer at first, just stared at the poster, lips parted, then voice brittle. "He found me." Tohi said nothing, just knelt beside the fire, eyes low. Silas stepped forward. "Who is he?" She swallowed. The words came slowly, like they'd been caged too long. "His name is Cutter. Used to be a bounty hunter, then something changed in him." She turned the poster over as if expecting something else on the back. Her fingers pressed into the paper like she could erase it through force alone. "He's not chasing justice. He's chasing revenge." Silas's voice was quiet. "What did you do?" Her eyes lifted, filled with fire. "I ran, that's all." The forest held its breath. "I saw something I wasn't supposed to. A man, tied up, beaten, then shot in the back after they told him he was free to go." She paused, jaw clenching. "I ran before they could do the same to me. Cutter's the one who pulled the trigger." Tohi looked at Silas. "Then she is not prey, she is witness." Annabelle folded the poster carefully, tucking it into the small chest beside the hearth. "If he's here, it means he's already close. He doesn't post these unless he's finished his circle." Silas moved to the table, began checking ammunition. Tohi stepped forward. "You cannot outrun him." "I don't plan to," Annabelle said. The following day, they began building traps. Silas dug pits and laid branches over them. Tohi laced tripwires between trees. Annabelle, hands calloused now from labor, helped sharpen stakes. She moved with purpose, a quiet storm. At night, she stared at the sackcloth folded on the table, her breath slowed. Then, with deliberate calm, she picked it up and cut it in two. From one half she fashioned a hood again, from the other, a rope. Tohi watched her silently. "This shamed me once," she said. "Now it'll blind him." A week passed with no sign of Cutter. The forest grew tense. Animals moved strangely. The crows flew in circles and vanished. One night, the dog barked and wouldn't stop. Tohi returned from his watch. "Tomorrow," he said, "he comes." Annabelle didn't ask how he knew. She just nodded. The next morning, she braided her hair tightly and tucked it under the sackcloth hood. She smeared ash along the scar, hiding nothing. She strapped the knife to her thigh, then picked up Silas's old hunting musket. He looked at her with a mix of worry and pride. "You sure?" "I won't be sold again," she said. "Not to fear, not to him." The trap was set near the eastern ridge, where the trail narrowed. Tohi would draw him in. Silas would guard the perimeter. Annabelle would wait behind the snare. Midday came, then hoofbeats, slow, deliberate. The birds stopped singing. Tohi's hawk scream echoed once. She crouched behind the rock, heart pounding like a war drum. Then she saw him, black duster, scar over his lip, eyes like shards of ice. Cutter. He rode like death personified, rifle across his lap. She stood. He froze. "Annabelle," he drawled, "still wearing rags, I see." She stepped into the trail, sackcloth veil fluttering. "I'm not hiding," she said. "No, just decorating yourself with shame." He raised the rifle. She threw the sackcloth. It hit his face just as he pulled the trigger. The shot went wide. In the split second of confusion, the tripwire caught his horse's legs. The animal screamed. Cutter tumbled. His head hit stone. The rifle skidded. Annabelle stood over him, breathing hard, musket aimed. His voice gurgled. "You don't have it in you." She didn't answer. Silas appeared behind her. "You don't have to." She lowered the gun. Tohi stepped forward, tying Cutter's hands with the same rope Annabelle had fashioned. His eyes fluttered, blood trickling from his temple. "I want him to face truth," she said. "Not death. Let them see what he's done." Silas nodded. "We'll take him to town. Let the law have him." As dusk fell, they bound Cutter to the back of the mule cart. Annabelle stood by the fire, sackcloth in her hands. She traced the stitching with her fingers, then tucked it into the small cedar box beside Silas's carvings. Not as shame, as memory. Later that night, with Cutter unconscious and guarded, she sat beside the fire, eyes heavy but heart calm. Tohi stood, ready to return to the forest. She walked him to the edge of the clearing. "Why help me?" He touched the feather at his braid. "Because you reminded the forest of who you are." When he vanished into the trees, she felt no fear, only clarity. She turned back toward the cabin, the firelight glowing through the window, and knew this wasn't the end, just the beginning of who she was becoming. The storm came in the night, not with thunder, but with an eerie hush, like the woods were holding their breath. Wind whispered through the branches as if carrying secrets between trees. Inside the cabin the fire was low, crackling softly as Silas tightened the bandage around his arm. The cut wasn't deep, but it stung. Annabelle sat nearby, watching his face in the flickering glow, her own marked by a quiet, unwavering calm. The weight of what they'd done, what she'd done, settled between them like a second fire. Outside, the mule shifted restlessly. Tohi stood near the edge of the trees, barely visible, his silhouette motionless as stone. Cutter was tied to the heavy beam beside the woodshed, slumped over, still breathing but unconscious. They hadn't spoken since the ambush. They didn't need to. Some truths hung louder in silence. Annabelle wiped her hands on a rag, then stood. "He'll wake soon." Silas looked up, eyes tired but sharp. "You ready for what comes next?" She nodded. "I've been ready since I was sold like livestock." He reached for her hand, his rough fingers brushing the scar on her cheek. "You're not that woman anymore." "No," she said, her voice like dry leaves, "but she's part of me, and she needs to see this through." As dawn crept over the ridge, painting the cabin in ghost-pale light, Cutter stirred. His groan was low, animal-like. Blood had dried along his temple. His coat was torn, his rifle gone. He blinked into the rising Sioux, eyes squinting against the gold. Then he laughed. Tied up like a hog, he said. Thought you had it in you to shoot. Annabelle stood over him, the same sackcloth veil wrapped loosely in her hands. Her eyes were clear now, not haunted but resolved. You thought a lot of things that weren't true. He shifted, straining against the rope. Law's gonna want me back. I'm government paid, got contracts. Silas stepped forward, axe resting on his shoulder. That might have meant something once, but there's a difference between bounty hunting and murder. I was cleaning filth. You shot a freedman in the back, Annabelle said, her voice cutting through the morning stillness. And you were going to do the same to me. Cutter spat. You didn't matter. You were just another stray. Tohi approached quietly from the woods, crouched beside Cutter, and held up a folded paper. Another bounty, stained with mud. Your name's not on this one, he said softly. But hers is, and she's the only one here with a name left. Cutter fell silent. Annabelle knelt. We're taking you in, not because I want justice, because I want truth. He scoffed. Truth's a matter of who's talking. Then I'll talk, she said. In court, with the scar you gave me and the blood you left behind. They loaded him onto the cart. The trail to town was long and rough, but Cutter didn't struggle. He just sat, staring at the trees like they were closing in. Silas held the reins. Annabelle rode beside him, musket across her lap. Behind them, Tohi followed on foot, always a shadow's length away. Halfway down the ridge, Cutter spoke again. You think they'll believe you? A girl with a past and a sack on her head? Annabelle turned toward him. That sack was your idea of shame. I turned it into a trap. I turned it into truth. He smiled with broken teeth. You think you're free? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. When they arrived at the edge of the logging settlement, the townspeople watched them like a ghost story had come true. No one spoke as they passed, just moved aside as the cart rolled down the muddy road. The sheriff stepped from the doorway of his office, hand on his belt. Silas, he greeted. You bring trouble? Silas nodded at the man bound to the cart. We brought what the law missed. The sheriff eyed Cutter. That bounty's been stale for 2 months. Doesn't make him less guilty, Annabelle said. The sheriff studied her. Recognition flickered in his expression. He'd seen her once before, head covered, standing on an auction block like a body waiting for burial. Now she stood tall, musket in one hand, veil tucked at her side like a flag. Tell me everything, he said. And she did. In that small room, with the oil lamp flickering and the ledger open wide, she told the story of the man she watched die, of the shackles, the false release, the lie told by men in uniforms. She spoke of how she ran, the months in hiding, the names changed, the stares endured. She spoke of Silas, not as her savior but as the man who listened, of Tohi, not as a protector but a witness, and of herself, not as a victim but as someone who chose to live. The sheriff listened, then asked only one question. Would you testify under oath? She nodded once. Yes. Cutter cursed under his breath, but no one looked at him. His power was gone, reduced to a man bound in rope and shadow. They locked him in the cell. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. Annabelle walked through the muddy street, the sackcloth veil still in her hand. She paused at the old auction block. No one stood there now. The wood was warped, the bell rusted, but ghosts still lingered. She climbed it slowly, looked down at the town as she once had, with no name, no past, no hope. Then, without ceremony, she draped the sackcloth over the bell. Let the wind take it. She didn't cry. Not now. They returned to the cabin 2 days later. The woods welcomed them with birdsong and scattered petals. The trees, once menacing, now looked familiar, like guardians rather than jailers. Tohi stayed one more night, speaking little. At dawn, he left without goodbye, leaving only a feather tied to the cabin door. A thank you in silence. Annabelle found herself standing at the river that afternoon, the same spot where she'd once bathed in fear, always glancing over her shoulder. Now she washed without hurry. She let the cold water run over her skin and did not flinch when a bird called from the trees. Her reflection shimmered, scarred, yes, but whole. Silas sat on the porch carving something new. When she approached, he looked up and held out a small figure. A woman in a hood, not hunched, not hidden, standing straight. I didn't know what else to make, he said. She smiled, took it gently. It's perfect. The days that followed were quiet, but never empty. They worked side by side, clearing brush, rethatching the roof, mending fences. No longer strangers, no longer prisoners of the past. Spring came. One evening, Silas stood in the doorway, shirt tucked, hair combed with rough fingers. "Would you walk with me?" he asked. She followed without question. They went to the ridge overlooking the valley, the same one she once watched in fear, imagining footsteps chasing her. Now she saw only sky and green, and promise. He turned to her, heart in his throat. "I don't have rings, I don't have gold." She smiled. "I never wanted gold." "I do have something," he said, pulling a small cloth from his coat pocket. The sackcloth. Washed, stitched with tiny wildflowers in thread the color of pine. "It once hid you. Then you used it to trap him. Now, if you'll wear it, it can mean something else." He unfolded it, held it between them. She touched the cloth with careful fingers, then nodded. In the clearing, beneath the old cedar, he placed the veil over her hair, not to cover, but to crown. Her scar caught the sunset, glowing soft in silver. They said, "No vows." They didn't need them. He took her hands, she took his name, and the forest bore witness. Back at the cabin, the fire burned bright. A carved figure stood on the mantel, a woman, veil flowing, chin lifted. Later that night, as wind stirred the trees and stars blinked through the high branches, Annabelle wrote a letter she'd never send. "To the girl I used to be," it read, "you weren't weak. You were surviving, you weren't silent, you were storing strength. And now, with the man beside me and the forest behind me, I walk forward, not as a ghost, but as a woman made whole." She folded the paper and tucked it into the cedar box, beside the sackcloth veil, not hidden, treasured. Outside, the wind no longer whispered warnings, it sang lullabies, and inside, for the first time in her life, Annabelle slept without a knife under her pillow. The story didn't end with a wedding. It didn't need to. Life would continue with wood to chop, rivers to cross, and seasons to weather, but now she had hands to hold through it all. Hands rough with work, steady with love, and eyes that saw her not as a wound to be pitied, but a woman to be respected. In a world that once tried to bury her, she had chosen to root and grow. And the veil, once a symbol of silence, now hung beside the door, ready for the next wind. Ready to remind anyone who entered that survival is not shame, it is grace, earned and worn with pride. If this story stirred your heart, don't leave just yet. Subscribe for more powerful Western tales of courage, redemption, and untamed love. Like if Annabelle's journey inspired you, comment below. What did the sackcloth veil mean to you? And share this with someone who still believes in second chances. Because in the wild, love isn't just found, it's fought for.